I watched the command staff disintegrate into frantic activity. Officers who'd been calmly directing the hunt now shouted over each other, trying to re-establish control. Their displays showed hunter units moving in contradictory patterns, creating traffic jams in narrow passes and leaving entire sectors unmonitored. The system designed for perfect coordination was now amplifying their confusion. The Predators' technology worked against them. Their advanced comm systems carried every panicked order to every team simultaneously, creating information overload. Sensor networks provided too much data without clear prioritization. The very systems that should have given them control instead multiplied their uncertainty. They were drowning in information while Mira operated on simple, clear awareness. Luna's howl took on new significance during this breakdown. It became a timing mechanism that synchronized with Mira's movements inside the command center. Every time the dog vocalized, Mira would shift position or access a new terminal. The Predators started associating that sound with new crises, their reactions becoming increasingly fragmented and predictable. The clan's different hunting methodologies, which should have complemented each other, now worked at cross purposes. Varanpak tactics required space that Serpathy precision strikes needed to occupy. Mandrazi tracking patterns interfered with Krill swarm maneuvers. Their greatest strength, diverse hunting strategies, became their fatal flaw when coordination collapsed. Alexis monitored from orbit, watching the entire operation unravel in real time. She noted how the Predators' reliance on established protocols made them vulnerable to adaptive opponents. Their command structure, designed for efficiency against conventional threats, couldn't handle something that operated outside their understanding of confrontation. The resolution became painfully clear as the confusion deepened. The hunters weren't just failing to capture their targets, they were actively working against each other. Teams reported sightings that contradicted other teams' reports. Commanders issued orders that nullified other commanders' plans. The hunt had turned into a seven-way conflict with Mira and Luna as the only coordinated elements on the field. Their overwhelming force had turned inward, creating a self-inflicted crisis that required more attention than the actual hunt. The command staff spent more time managing internal conflicts than pursuing their targets. Mira's infiltration hadn't just broken their coordination, it had turned their greatest strength into their most critical vulnerability. The command center had fallen into that particular silence that happens when reality breaks. Mira stood there watching the Predator officers, her expression that same calm assessment she'd used in the clearing hours earlier. The Varan commander finally found his voice, sputtering about their numerical superiority, their firepower, their centuries of hunting evolution. He was still thinking in terms of physical dominance. That's when she asked the question that changed everything. Her voice cut through the tension without raising in volume. Superior numbers? You think this is about numbers? She let the question hang in the air while their displays showed hunter teams still scrambling through the wilderness. 200 of the galaxy's deadliest predators, equipped with enough weaponry to conquer a small planet, all deployed to capture one human teenager and her dog. And here she stood in their command center, untouched while they searched empty canyons. The math didn't add up. That was the point. They'd brought overwhelming force against something that didn't fight with force. They'd deployed hunters against something that didn't behave like prey. Their entire understanding of conflict had just been demonstrated as fundamentally flawed. Mira didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The evidence was on their own screens. Hunter teams reporting false contacts, coordination breakdowns, psychological fatigue. Their superior numbers had become a liability. Their advanced technology had created blind spots. Their centuries of hunting evolution had made them predictable. The command staff finally stopped looking at her as a target and started seeing what she represented. This wasn't about physical capability. It was about cognitive flexibility. While they'd been counting claws and calculating bite force, she'd been studying their patterns, understanding their psychology, and turning their strengths against them. I watched recognition dawn across their faces. The Varan commander's crest feathers flattened completely. The Serpathy officer's mandibles went still. They'd been so certain of their superiority that they never considered someone might win by refusing to play their game. Humans don't fight against overwhelming force, they find ways to make overwhelming force irrelevant. Their hunters were still out there, still searching, still following protocols that had become traps. Mira and Luna had turned their numerical advantage into a coordination nightmare. 200 hunters required 200 supply lines, 200 communication channels, 200 potential points of failure. One adaptive intelligence required nothing but awareness and opportunity. The resolution settled over the command center like physical weight. They hadn't been outmuscled or outgunned. They'd been outthought. Their predators were still the biggest, fastest, deadliest hunters in the sector. And none of that mattered against opponents who refused to compete on those terms. Human persistence had overcome predatory superiority, not through confrontation, but through redirection. They hadn't beaten the hunters, they'd made the hunters beat themselves. The clan's confidence had become their vulnerability. Their certainty had become their weakness. Their strength had become their liability. The silence stretched as the command staff processed the implications. This wasn't just about losing a hunt. This was about their entire understanding of conflict being proven inadequate. They'd brought a galaxy's worth of hunting capability to a challenge that required something entirely different. Mira didn't gloat or threaten. She just stood there, her calm presence more devastating than any victory declaration. The demonstration was complete. The lesson had been delivered. Adaptability had beaten brute force. Thinking had overcome fighting. The hunters were still out there, still searching, still following their training. But in that command center, the war had already ended. The predators had lost the moment they accepted a challenge they didn't understand. Superior numbers only matter if your opponent cares about numbers. The hunt's psychological shockwaves spread far beyond that single moon. I watched from the observation deck as council representatives from a dozen neutral species monitored the feeds, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something closer to alarm. This wasn't just about one girl and her dog surviving against ridiculous odds. It was about the entire galactic power structure getting a reality check. What they witnessed represented a fundamental shift in conflict methodology. Humanity's approach to predation through partnership and adaptability wasn't just different. It was disruptive on a scale nobody had anticipated. The clans had brought their centuries of hunting evolution to a contest that required something entirely new. They'd been playing chess while humanity was redesigning the board. The implications settled over the observation decks like atmospheric pressure. If one teenager with a protection dog could neutralize 200 elite hunters, what could the Human Federation accomplish with their specialized breeds? They had dogs bred for zero-G operations, scent tracking in methane atmospheres, even neural interfacing with ship systems. This demonstration offered a terrifying glimpse into what human adaptability could achieve at scale. Diplomatic channels lit up with reassessments. Species that had viewed humanity as a secondary power suddenly started recalculating their positions. The blueprint for future engagements had just been written in real time, and it didn't involve overwhelming force or technological superiority. It involved outthinking your opponent so completely that their advantages became irrelevant. Coexistence through mediation suddenly became viable, where conquest had always failed. The predator's entire philosophy of territorial dominance had just been demonstrated as inadequate against opponents who refused to compete on physical terms. Their confidence in military solutions evaporated as they watched their best hunters struggle against unconventional tactics. The age of predator clans was ending, not with a war, but with a demonstration. Humanity's age began the moment Mira stepped into that command center and proved that adaptability beats aggression every time. The galactic power structure shifted toward those who could think, rather than those who could fight. I watched neutral species delegates exchanging looks that said they understood the new reality. Their military advisors started taking notes on human psychological operations instead of weapon specifications. Their diplomatic corps began studying partnership models instead of surrender terms. The entire approach to conflict resolution had just been rewritten. The Human Federation's emphasis on mediation and shared resources suddenly made strategic sense. Where predators saw resources to conquer, humans saw systems to manage. Where clans sought domination, humans sought stability. The demonstration proved that their approach wasn't weakness, it was advanced strategic thinking, counsel. Observers who'd been skeptical of human diplomatic proposals started requesting copies of their conflict mediation frameworks. The shift happened almost visibly in real time as the hunt progressed from pursuit to psychological dominance. They weren't just watching a survival story. They were witnessing the birth of a new galactic paradigm. The predator's acceptance of neutral administration wasn't just a tactical concession. It was recognition that their entire understanding of power had been flawed. They'd measured strength in claws and ships while humanity measured it in adaptability and persistence. The demonstration forced them to acknowledge that cognitive flexibility outweighed physical superiority. This outcome represented a catastrophic war avoided through strategic thinking rather than military victory. The clans didn't just lose territory, they lost confidence in their fundamental operating principles. Their respect for human capabilities grew from the realization that they'd been outmaneuvered intellectually rather than overpowered physically. The blueprint for future engagements had been established. Conflict would no longer be about who had the biggest weapons, but who could adapt fastest to changing circumstances. The human approach to predation through partnership and adaptability changed everything from military doctrine to diplomatic protocols in a single planetary rotation. The 7 predator clans conceded to neutral administration of the expanse. I watched the agreement formalize through observation deck glass, the clan leaders signing documentation with claws that had previously been sharpened for war. They accepted human mediation and resource management frameworks with that particular resignation predators show when they've been outmaneuvered intellectually rather than overpowered physically. This represented a catastrophic war avoided through negotiated settlement. The conflict that would have consumed fleets and star systems ended with paperwork and mutual concessions. The clan's pride was visibly tempered by newfound respect for human capabilities. They'd come expecting to dominate through force and left understanding that adaptability beats aggression every time. They saw how cooperation could achieve what competition couldn't: lasting solutions. Where territorial conquest would have created perpetual resentment, mediated management created frameworks for ongoing engagement. The predators didn't just lose the expanse, they gained a new operating model for interstellar relations. Alexis framed the victory as a lesson in adaptive thinking and cross-species trust. She stood before the council not as a triumphant victor, but as a demonstration lead. Her briefing focused on how the hunt revealed weaknesses in conventional conflict models, rather than highlighting predator failures. She turned a humiliation into a learning opportunity. Institutional mediation would replace zero-sum conquest in future disputes. The Council's reluctant consensus evolved into formal negotiations that established human mediators as neutral arbiters. What started as a desperate gamble became standard operating procedure for resource conflict resolution. Mira and Luna's victory became a milestone in predator diplomacy. Military academies across 7 territories began studying their tactics instead of dismissing them. The story of a girl and her dog outthinking 200 hunters became required reading for command staff. Their partnership demonstrated that cognitive flexibility outweighed physical superiority. The story closed on cautious optimism about humanity's role in galactic affairs. Where other species saw a disruptive power, I saw a stabilizing influence. The Human Federation's emphasis on mediation and shared resources suddenly made strategic sense to observers who'd previously considered it weakness. The Predator's acceptance wasn't just tactical, it was philosophical. They'd been forced to reconsider their fundamental understanding of conflict. Where they saw resources to conquer, humans saw systems to manage. Where they sought domination, humans sought stability. The demonstration proved which approach created more sustainable outcomes. I watched the clan leaders depart with different posture than they'd arrived. Less swagger, more contemplation. The Varan representative actually nodded to Alexis on his way out, a gesture of respect their species rarely offers outside their own kind. The Serpathy commander paused to study the documentation before signing, as if seeing the words for the first time. The resolution didn't create instant friendship. It created professional respect born from demonstrated capability. The Predators hadn't been defeated so much as educated. Their entire operational philosophy had been proven inadequate against adaptable opponents. Humanity's role shifted from peripheral player to essential mediator in that single rotation. Neutral species began requesting human arbitration for their own disputes. The Council amended its conflict resolution protocols to include adaptive thinking assessments. The galactic power structure tilted toward those who could solve problems, rather than those who could create them. The Kethra expanse became a managed territory, rather than a contested prize. Human mediators established extraction quotas that balanced clan needs with long-term sustainability. The resources that would have fueled war instead funded cooperation. The predators got access without ownership. Humanity got oversight without domination. Mira and Luna became symbols of a new approach to conflict. Their names circulated through diplomatic channels as shorthand for cognitive flexibility, overcoming physical superiority. Military strategists started talking about the Castellanos maneuver when describing turning opponent strengths into vulnerabilities. The age of pure predation was ending. The age of adaptive mediation was beginning. And it all started because 7 predator clans thought they were hunting a child and her dog, only to discover they were being studied by a new kind of intelligence. Alexis stood before the council with that look humans get when they're about to rewrite your understanding of reality. She didn't gloat about the victory. She explained it. Said apex predation isn't about claw length or sprint speed, it's about environment-specific mastery and the simple refusal to quit. Humans don't win by being stronger. They win by outlasting everyone else in the room. I watched the predator commanders actually listen this time. No more dismissive snorts or claw sharpening. They'd just seen 200 of their best hunters defeated by a teenager, and her dog using nothing but clever positioning and psychological pressure. The lesson had been delivered in the most convincing way possible, through demonstration. She used the honey badger example. Tiny thing compared to lions or hyenas, but absolutely fearless. Doesn't win through strength, wins through pure persistence. Refuses to yield no matter the odds. That's humanity's strategic advantage. They just don't know how to quit. Adapt, improvise, persist. Repeat until you win. This reframing made the predators reconsider everything. Their entire philosophy of dominance through physical superiority had just been proven inadequate. The encounter became a cautionary tale about the limits of brute force when faced with adaptive intelligence. They'd brought overwhelming power to a contest that required flexible thinking. The human-dog partnership symbolized the new standard. Not master and servant, but 2 intelligences working as one system. Luna's protection instincts combined with Mira's strategic thinking created something none of the predators had prepared for. Their bond demonstrated that strength comes in forms beyond physical capability. Diplomacy would now include adaptable intelligence as key currency. The council started talking about cognitive flexibility assessments alongside military capability reviews. Species that could think their way around problems suddenly became more valuable than those who could only fight through them. The power structure shifted toward brains over brawn. Nothing would ever be quite the same after that demonstration. Military academies across 7 territories began revising their curricula. Command staff started studying human psychological operations. The age of pure predation was ending, replaced by something more nuanced and ultimately more effective. Luna's white form moving through those canyons and Mira's steady gaze in the command center represented this new future. They weren't just a girl and her dog. They were a demonstration of what happens when you combine persistence with partnership. The predators had seen the future of conflict, and it didn't involve bigger weapons or faster ships. I watched the clan leaders absorb this new reality. Their posture had changed from confident aggression to thoughtful assessment. The Voron representative kept glancing at the tactical displays showing hunter teams still searching the wilderness. The Serpathy commander studied his own claws like he was seeing them for the first time. Humanity's philosophy of persistence through adaptability had been validated on the galactic stage. Their approach to conflict, outthink rather than outfight, became the new standard for interstellar relations. The demonstration proved that sometimes the strongest move is refusing to play by conventional rules. The council chambers felt different afterward, less like a predator gathering and more like a strategic planning session. Delegates who'd previously measured strength in fleet sizes now discussed cognitive flexibility indexes. Military advisors started requesting human mediation specialists for their training programs. Luna's howl echoing through those canyons became symbolic of the shift. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder that sometimes the most effective weapon is the one that changes the game completely. The predators had learned that humanity's greatest strength wasn't force, but the relentless application of intelligence against obstacles. Mira's calm presence in their command center demonstrated that control isn't about physical dominance. It's about psychological positioning. She didn't defeat their hunters. She made their hunters defeat themselves. Their numerical superiority became their coordination nightmare. Their advanced technology became their information overload. The philosophy of persistence had been proven under the most extreme conditions. One adaptable intelligence against 200 specialized hunters. The outcome wasn't just a victory, it was a paradigm shift. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the smallest, most persistent force can overcome the largest, most powerful opposition. The demonstration left everyone watching with more questions than answers. I documented the uncertainty spreading through Council observation decks like atmospheric leakage. Predator commanders kept glancing at tactical displays as if they might find different outcomes on second viewing. The fundamental question hung in the air. Would the clans adapt to human methods or resist this new paradigm entirely? The Cathra Expanse settlement established precedents that would ripple through future disputes. Neutral administration with human. Mediation became the template rather than the exception. I watched diplomatic channels light up with requests for similar frameworks in other contested territories. Everyone wanted the stability without the bloodshed, even if it meant accepting human oversight. Humanity's role as mediators came with complications they might not have anticipated. Power brings responsibility, and responsibility attracts scrutiny. Other species began watching how the Human Federation would handle their newfound influence. Would they become just another power block, or maintain their commitment to cooperative solutions? The galactic power structure shifted toward adaptive thinkers almost overnight. Military academies started prioritizing cognitive flexibility assessments alongside physical training. Command staff who could outthink opponents became more valuable than those who could simply outfight them. The demonstration proved brains could defeat brawn on an interstellar scale. Mira and Luna's bond became required study across 7 military academies. Tactical analysts pored over engagement footage looking for patterns in their coordination. The partnership demonstrated that 2 minds could operate as one system more effectively than any single enhanced individual. Their success challenged centuries of predator combat doctrine. The unanswered questions multiplied with each analysis. Would predator clans develop their own version of human adaptability? Could they learn to think rather than just react? Or would they cling to traditional methods that had just been proven inadequate? The uncertainty created tension across diplomatic channels. I watched the clan leaders depart with that particular posture of reevaluation. Their movements lacked the confident swagger of their arrival. The Varan representative actually paused to speak with human diplomatic staff on his way out. The Serpathy. Commander studied the settlement documents like they contained hidden patterns. The hunt ended one conflict but initiated a new era of strategic evolution. Military doctrines that had stood for centuries required complete overhaul. Diplomatic approaches needed fundamental restructuring. The entire galaxy faced recalibration. Because one teenager and her dog had outthought 200 hunters, other species began reevaluating their own strategic positions. Those who had relied on military might started investing in cognitive research. Those who emphasized adaptability found their value increasing in diplomatic markets. The power landscape shifted toward intelligence and flexibility over raw capability. The Council of Predators faced their own existential questions. Their entire philosophy of conflict resolution had been demonstrated as obsolete. They'd been orchestrating wars like symphonies of destruction, while humanity was rewriting the musical scale. The adjustment would require humility many might not possess. I documented these changes from my observation post, noting how quickly paradigms can shift when demonstrated rather than debated. The predators hadn't been convinced by arguments. They'd been convinced by evidence. Their own hunter's failure proved more persuasive than any diplomatic speech. The galaxy adjusted to humanity's demonstration with that mixture of reluctance and necessity that accompanies paradigm shifts. Military strategists adopted new terminology. Diplomatic corps developed new protocols. Everyone understood that the rules had changed, even if they didn't yet understand all the implications. Mira and Luna's legacy became that of demonstration rather than victory. They hadn't just won a contest, they'd revealed a fundamental truth about conflict resolution. Sometimes the strongest move is refusing to play by established rules. Sometimes persistence and adaptability overcome even the most overwhelming force. The unanswered questions would take years to resolve. But the direction had been set. The age of pure predation was ending, replaced by something more nuanced and ultimately more effective. The galaxy had witnessed the future, and it involved more thinking and less fighting. Mira and Luna's story didn't just spread. It rewrote the definition of legend across 7 clan territories. I watched their names become shorthand for how partnership dismantles overwhelming force. Military doctrines that had stood for centuries underwent sudden, uncomfortable revisions. Command staff who'd built careers on aggression found themselves studying persistence tactics and cognitive adaptability. The age of humanity began not with conquest, but with demonstrated superiority in thinking differently. Predator clans initiated research into human-dog partnerships, trying to replicate that synergy with their own native species. They weren't just adopting tactics. They were attempting to internalize an entirely new philosophy of operation. The Council of Predators formally incorporated human mediators into dispute resolution protocols, a concession that would have been unthinkable before Talvor 7. Alexis Morgan's gamble became the standard reference for strategic innovation. Military academies used her presentation to the Council as a case study in turning leisure into advantage. Her calm delivery and flawless timing were analyzed alongside the tactical movements of Mira and Luna. The 3 of them became a trinity of demonstrated adaptability. Talvor 7 itself transformed from a hunt zone to a training ground for diplomatic approaches. I watched new classes of cadets walking those canyons, not to practice hunting but to understand environmental mastery. They studied how Mira used terrain as weaponry and how Luna turned psychological pressure into tactical advantage. The planet became a living classroom for a new kind of conflict resolution. The resolution settled into galactic politics with quiet inevitability. One hunt between a girl and her dog didn't just avoid a war, it reshaped how species interact across the entire sector. The demonstration proved that coexistence through mediation could succeed where conquest would have failed catastrophically. The clan's acceptance of neutral administration became the model for resource disputes elsewhere. I still hear Luna's howl in my dreams sometimes. That particular frequency, that disrupted predator communications and triggered primal instincts. It echoes through memory with the same clarity it had in those canyons. The sound reminds me how completely everything changed in that single planetary rotation. The legacy isn't just in changed policies or new training protocols. It's in the subtle shift of how predators assess threats now. They look for adaptability instead of just firepower. They value cognitive flexibility alongside physical capability. The demonstration forced a re-evaluation of what strength actually means in practical terms. Humanity's role evolved from peripheral participant to essential mediator. Their approach to conflict, outthinking rather than outfighting, became the new standard for interstellar relations. Other species began seeking their arbitration for disputes that previously would have ended in warfare. The diplomatic landscape tilted toward those who could solve problems rather than create them. Mira and Luna's partnership became the subject of intensive study across multiple scientific disciplines. Neurological researchers examined their bond, tactical analysts dissected their coordination, and psychologists explored their communication patterns. Their success challenged fundamental assumptions about interspecies cooperation. The Predator's concession to neutral administration represented more than tactical defeat. It symbolized acceptance of a new operational reality. Their entire philosophy of dominance through physical superiority had been proven inadequate against opponents who refused to compete on those terms. The shift was philosophical as much as strategic. I document these changes from my observation post, watching the new paradigm settle into place. The galaxy feels different now, less certain in its old certainties, more open to unconventional solutions. The age of pure predation is ending, replaced by something more nuanced and ultimately more effective. One hunt reshaped everything, and the echoes are still spreading. The predators learned a fundamental truth that day. Humanity's greatest weapon isn't raw power. It's their stubborn refusal to accept defeat. So next time someone tells you the odds are impossible, just remember, somewhere out there on the edge of known space, a girl and her dog are still running. They move like a single mind through dark canyons and silent forests. and 7 predator clans look up at the stars and tremble at what that bond represents. The mental fatigue hit them before physical exhaustion did. I watched predator teams become increasingly cautious, their movements losing that confident aggression they'd started with. They'd pause before entering areas, double-check sensor readings, question their own observations. The krill teams actually requested additional support due to what they called psychological contamination, their term for the unease spreading through their ranks. It was fascinating to watch from the observation deck. These were species built for hunting, refined through millennia of evolutionary pressure, and they were being undone by a teenager and her dog using psychological tactics they'd never encountered. Their confidence eroded with each encounter, replaced by growing doubt about their own capabilities. The Sympathy Strike team's experience in the Box Canyon became typical. They had Mira and Luna cornered against a rock face, perfect tactical position. Then Luna's howl triggered something primal in their hindbrains. That momentary hesitation allowed Mira to use scent markers and terrain traps to break their formation. They retreated not because of physical damage, but because the engagement no longer made sense to them. Commanders began reporting the same phenomenon across different sectors. Their hunters were losing effectiveness not from injuries or equipment failure, but from psychological pressure. The constant uncertainty, the disrupted communications, the target that never behaved as expected, it wore them down in ways physical combat never could. The resolution became clear as the hunt progressed. The mental strain of hunting something unpredictable was taking its toll faster than any physical challenge. Teams that should have been fresh after 6 hours were showing signs of psychological fatigue. Their reports contained more questions than observations, more uncertainty than certainty. By the 8th hour, the krill formally requested psychological support teams. Their hunters were experiencing coordination breakdowns and decision-making impairment. The report cited contamination of operational certainty as the primary issue. Translation: they'd lost confidence in their ability to understand what was happening. That's when I knew the psychological warfare had worked. They weren't just failing to capture Mira and Luna, they were failing to comprehend them. The hunter's greatest strength, their predatory certainty, had become their greatest vulnerability against opponents who weaponized uncertainty itself. The mental landscape of the hunt had shifted completely. Where there should have been confident pursuit, there was hesitant searching. Where there should have been coordinated action, there was fragmented reaction. Mira and Luna hadn't just survived, they'd reprogrammed the entire engagement through psychological pressure. Mira's boldest move began taking shape while 200 hunters searched the wilderness above ground. She'd identified the critical weakness in predator operations, their centralized command structure. While they focused on finding her, she decided to visit the place they'd never expect prey to go, their own nerve center. She used a Mandracom badge acquired during that first encounter with the scout. The security systems were designed to detect panic, elevated heart rates, adrenaline spikes, all the biological markers of hunted creatures. Mira's vitals remained steady as she moved through access tunnels. Her calm, purposeful movement didn't register as threat behavior on their sensors. Luna created diversions topside. She'd appear briefly in ravines, trigger motion sensors, then vanish before hunter teams could respond. The predators kept reporting contacts in remote areas while Mira moved steadily toward their strongest defensive position. They never considered that their prey would approach the one place they felt most secure. I watched her progress through secondary surveillance feeds. She moved with that same assessment posture she'd used in the clearing, analyzing sightlines, identifying choke points, noting security patterns. She wasn't sneaking so much as walking through their psychological blind spots. The predators had prepared for every conventional hunting scenario except one, the prey coming to visit. She reached the Varan command post without triggering a single alarm. The security teams were watching external feeds, tracking hunter movements across the wilderness zone. Their attention was directed outward, expecting threats to come from outside their perimeter. Mira came from within their own infrastructure. The command center hummed with activity when she entered. Officers monitored tactical displays, analyzed sensor data, coordinated hunter movements. They were so focused on the hunt outside that they didn't notice the hunt target standing in their operations room. That first moment of recognition happened slowly. A junior communications officer looked up from his console, did a double take, then froze. His hand hovered over the alarm button as he processed what he was seeing. Mira didn't look like a threat, just a human teenager in simple environmental gear, watching them with that calm assessment look. More officers noticed. The activity in the room slowed as awareness spread. They weren't looking at sensor feeds anymore. They were looking at the actual target standing among them. The cognitive dissonance was almost physical. Their prey wasn't supposed to be here. Their prey was supposed to be running scared in the wilderness. The first alert went out too late. By the time someone triggered the intrusion alarm, Mira had already positioned herself where she could observe their entire operation. She wasn't attacking or threatening, just watching, assessing, understanding how they coordinated their hunters. The chaos that followed was something to behold. Command staff scrambled to understand how she'd gotten past their security. Hunter teams were recalling from field operations. The carefully coordinated hunt fragmented into separate, desperate responses. Their numerical superiority became meaningless because the target was no longer where they'd been searching. Mira's infiltration demonstrated something fundamental about predator psychology. They'd built their command structure around the assumption that threats would come from outside their perimeter. They never considered that the threat might walk through their front door using their own security protocols against them. The alert that finally went out carried that particular tone of disbelief that comes with fundamental paradigm shifts. Target has infiltrated central position. Not just breached security, not just bypassed defenses, infiltrated the one place they thought was safe from her. I watched the command staff try to regain control of the situation. They were issuing conflicting orders, recalling teams from the field trying to secure their own facility. The hunt had inverted completely. They were no longer pursuing Mira. They were containing her presence in their operations center. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Hunter teams that had been methodically searching the wilderness now had to reverse course and return to base. Commanders who'd been coordinating complex operations now had to secure their own headquarters. The entire Predator operation collapsed inward upon itself. Mira didn't need to attack their systems or disable their equipment. Her mere presence in their command center was enough to disrupt everything. She'd turned their greatest strength, their centralized coordination, into their greatest vulnerability. The hunters were no longer hunting. They were scrambling to protect what they'd thought was untouchable. Mira's presence in the Varan command post sent shockwaves through the entire operation. Clan commanders began shouting over each other on comm channels, their voices layering into a chaotic mess of conflicting orders. The unified hunt shattered into 7 separate, desperate missions as each species reverted to its own survival protocols. They couldn't process how their prey had become the hunter standing at the heart of their coordination hub. Her calm restraint proved more disruptive than any show of force. She didn't sabotage equipment or threaten personnel. She just stood there observing, her silence louder than any declaration of war. That stillness forced the predators to react, to second-guess, to overcompensate. She decided when to move and when to hold position with perfect timing, always staying one mental step ahead of their escalating panic. Luna's role in the breakdown was just as critical. She appeared and vanished across the wilderness in sync with Mira's positioning inside the command center. Her movements weren't random. They were deliberate distractions that pulled hunter teams in conflicting directions. The dog would trigger a motion sensor in the northern ravines, just as Mira shifted position in the command post, creating simultaneous crises the predators couldn't prioritize. Their numerical superiority turned into their greatest weakness. 200 hunters scrambling without coordination became 200 individual problems instead of one coordinated force. Varan teams crashed into Serpathy patrols because nobody was managing sector boundaries. Mandracy scouts found themselves tripping over krill pursuit packs. The clan's strength had always been their specialized capabilities, but without coordination, those specialties just clashed with each other. Commanders started reporting the same thing across different channels. The target was using their tactics against them. Varan teams found themselves caught in pincer movements that mirrored their own hunting patterns. Mandracy scouts discovered their favorite observation posts had been subtly altered to make them visible from new angles. The hunt had shifted from pursuit to problem-solving, and humans solve problems by understanding systems. I watched a krill team attempt to set up a classic encirclement maneuver. They moved with perfect synchronization, cutting off escape routes and tightening the perimeter. Mira and Luna didn't try to break through. They simply waited for the pattern to complete, then used the krill's own formation against them. Luna created a disturbance at one point while Mira slipped through the gap that created in their attention. The psychological impact grew with each engagement. Hunters began hesitating before committing to actions. They second-guessed their training. The certainty that had defined predator operations was replaced by doubt. When your own methods get used against you, everything becomes questionable. Alexis noted the pattern in her logs. Strength becomes weakness when opponents can anticipate and redirect it. Specialization becomes vulnerability when faced with adaptability. The hunters were playing chess while Mira and Luna were playing an entirely different game with the same pieces. By the third hour, the command channels carried a new tone. Not frustration or anger, but something closer to confusion. Reports started including phrases like unpredictable pattern and non-standard response. They'd prepared for combat against known parameters. They got a demonstration in creative problem-solving. The terrain itself seemed to shift against them. Ravines that should have been containment zones became escape routes. Open fields that should have favored the hunter's mobility became psychological barriers. Mira and Luna didn't fight the environment. They collaborated with it. I watched a Varan commander finally voice what everyone was thinking. Over an encrypted channel, he said they needed to stop treating this as a hunt and start treating it as a tactical engagement against an intelligent opponent. The problem was, by then, the intelligent opponent already controlled the board. Mira understood Talvor 7's geography in ways that baffled the predator clans. She didn't just navigate the terrain, she weaponized it. Every ravine became a potential ambush point. Every open field a psychological barrier. I watched thermal feeds show her reading the landscape like a tactical map only she could see. Luna's movement patterns exploited sensory blind spots with precision. She'd position herself where scent trails would distort in wind currents, creating false readings for the Mandrazi trackers. Her paw placements avoided ground disturbances that might register on vibration sensors. They didn't hide so much as selectively disappear into environments the predators thought they controlled. The Varan teams reported the most frustration. Their advanced sensor systems kept losing targets in areas they should have dominated. Mira would lead them into box canyons where thermal imaging became useless against sun-heated rock faces. She used mineral deposits to mask their biosignatures, turning geological features into stealth technology. Open fields became psychological operations. Where predators expected clear pursuit channels, Mira created uncertainty. She'd position Luna at one edge while she moved parallel along tree lines, creating the illusion of multiple targets. Hunters would spread their formations thin across open ground, only to find the real threat was behind them. Their environmental mastery allowed them to predict predator movements with unsettling accuracy. Mira knew the Varan would take high ground for surveillance. She understood the Serpathy preferred covered approaches. The Mandrazi always followed the easiest scent paths. She positioned herself where these strategies would conflict with each other. I watched one engagement where she herded a Varan team into a Serpathy observation zone. The predators nearly came to blows over territorial confusion before realizing they'd been manipulated. Their own hunting protocols became tools she used against them. The environment stopped being neutral ground and became an extension of their partnership strategy. Ravines served as natural amplification chambers for Luna's vocalizations. Mira would position them at narrow points where sound would carry further and distort predator communications. The Mandrazi reported their scout teams losing comms consistency whenever they entered certain geological formations. She used mud flats not for concealment but for misdirection. Luna would create tracks leading into unstable areas, then they'd backtrack over rock surfaces. Predator teams wasted hours following false trails into terrain that hampered their mobility. The hunters kept thinking they were closing in, only to find they'd been led in circles. The psychological impact grew with each environmental manipulation. Hunters began distrusting their own terrain assessments. They'd hesitate before entering areas that should have been tactically advantageous. The very landscape felt like it had turned against them. Mira's training in terrain reading became her greatest weapon. She could predict how sound would carry across valleys where thermal inversions would create sensor ghosts, which rock formations would provide the best acoustic cover. Luna complemented this with her ability to read minute environmental changes through scent and vibration. Their partnership transformed the hunt from a pursuit into a demonstration of environmental mastery. The predators weren't just hunting elusive targets. They were struggling against the planet itself. Every natural feature became a potential ally for the human and her dog. Every weather shift an advantage they could exploit. The Varan commander's frustration became palpable over comms. He kept demanding updated terrain maps, better sensor calibration, more frequent environmental scans. None of it helped. The problem wasn't their equipment. It was their fundamental misunderstanding of how environment could be weaponized. When teams finally reported visual contact, it was always brief, a flash of movement between rocks, a distant figure on a ridgeline, the glimpse of white fur disappearing into foliage. They were hunting ghosts who knew the territory better than they did, who moved through it like it was part of their tactical planning. The resolution became clear as the hunt progressed. Mira and Luna hadn't just learned to survive in this environment. They'd learned to collaborate with it. The terrain became their silent partner in the engagement, providing cover, creating opportunities, and frustrating their pursuers at every turn. Luna's presence alone became a psychological weapon more effective than any blade or blaster. Her size triggered primal recognition in the predator species, that instinctual response to large canines that says danger and prey simultaneously. But her behavior scrambled those instincts until the hunters didn't know how to process what they were seeing. She didn't attack like a combat animal should. She didn't flee like prey ought to. She operated with that calculated purpose that made predators question their own evolutionary programming. I watched hunter teams hesitate when they should have advanced, second guess when they should have committed. Their training hadn't prepared them for something that defied categorization. Her howl became the most effective disruption tool in the engagement. It carried frequencies that bypassed auditory processing and went straight to the hindbrain. Communication systems developed static at specific ranges. Predator teams reported disorientation and coordination breakdowns whenever that sound echoed through the canyons. It wasn't loud, just unnervingly penetrating. Mira used these sonic disruptions like a conductor timing orchestral movements. She'd wait for Luna's vocalization to create confusion, then reposition them during the resulting comms blackout. They controlled engagement timing not through force but through calculated interference. The hunters never knew when their systems would fail, or when the next psychological pressure would hit. They created uncertainty, where predators expected certainty. Hunter teams would report visual contact, only to lose it during the next howl-induced static burst. They'd set up perfect ambush positions, then find their targets had moved during the brief window when their sensors were compromised. The psychological strain started showing in their reports, phrases like unpredictable pattern and non-standard response. Mira and Luna dropped in by low-altitude pod, unarmed and wearing simple environmental suits. No weapons, no armor, no specialized gear. Just a teenager and her dog standing in a clearing as the pod lifted away. I watched their biometrics on the monitor, both calm, steady rhythms. No adrenaline spikes, no panic responses. The predators expected frantic running, desperate attempts to hide, maybe even clumsy defensive posturing. Instead, Mira did a slow visual sweep of the terrain while Luna circled her, nose to the wind. They moved toward a rock formation not for cover but for elevation. Mira scanned sightlines while Luna tested air currents. They weren't behaving like prey assessing escape routes. They were commanders evaluating a battlefield. Within minutes, they'd established a pattern of movement that defied predator expectations. They didn't try to conceal their location, they controlled it. Mira used terrain features to limit approach angles. Luna identified and marked scent boundaries. They moved with purpose rather than urgency, always maintaining tactical awareness. The hunters picked up their trail almost immediately. Thermal signatures, ground disturbance, even auditory tracking. All the conventional methods worked perfectly. That was the problem. The targets wanted to be found. They just controlled how and when the finding happened. The Mandrazi scout was the first to make contact. Young, eager, fresh from his clan's hunting academies. He spotted them from a ridgeline, 2 heat signatures moving calmly through a gully below. Perfect intercept trajectory. He signaled his position to command and began his descent, already anticipating the honor of first capture. He moved with that confident aggression Mandrazi learned from childhood, the certainty that your physical superiority guarantees victory. He expected to see fear, panic, maybe even clumsy attempts to fight back. What he found was Luna standing between him and Mira, Not in an attack stance, but in what humans call a blocking position. And Mira watching him with that same calm expression Alexis had worn in the council chamber. The scout hesitated. This wasn't how prey was supposed to behave. The dog wasn't barking or charging, just standing there watching him with an intelligence that felt wrong in an animal. The girl didn't look frightened. She looked assessing. That hesitation cost him. In the time it took him to process the unexpected behavior, Mira and Luna had already adjusted their position to control the engagement space. They weren't running. They were engineering the confrontation. The Mandracy scout found them exactly where his thermal scan predicted, standing in a small clearing like they'd been waiting for him. I watched his approach through the observation feed, that confident predator stride that says the hunt is already over. He moved with the certainty of someone who'd done this 1,000 times against far more dangerous targets. To him, this was barely a challenge, a human child and her animal unarmed and exposed. Luna moved first. Not with the attack he expected, but with a positioning that put her between the scout and Mira. She didn't growl or bare teeth, just stood there massive and immovable, creating a physical barrier that felt psychological. That's the thing about protection breeds, their presence alone changes the geometry of a space. The scout hesitated, his forward momentum broken by something he hadn't anticipated. Calm resistance. Mira didn't retreat or show fear. She stood exactly where she was, watching the scout with that assessment look humans get when they're calculating angles. Her voice carried across the distance with what the reports would later describe as calm certainty. No panic, no raised pitch, just clear instruction. She told him to stop moving and listen. The scout actually froze. Instinct told him to charge. Training told him to assess, but something about their coordinated stillness made him pause. Luna hadn't attacked, but her positioning made clear that advancing meant confrontation. Mira hadn't threatened, but her tone carried authority that didn't match her age or situation. What happened next wasn't physical combat. It was psychological repositioning, Mira explained, calmly, like she was giving directions to a lost traveler, that he should return to his commanders with a message. This wasn't a hunt anymore. It was a warning. The standoff lasted maybe 8 seconds total, but in that time the power dynamic completely inverted. The scout's confidence visibly fractured. You could see it in his posture, the slight backward lean, the way his crest feathers flattened against his skull. He'd come expecting to capture panicked prey, and instead found himself being given instructions by his intended target. Luna hadn't touched him, but her presence felt like physical pressure. Mira hadn't raised her voice, but her words carried finality. He broke first, took a step back, then another, maintaining eye contact like retreating from a dangerous animal. That's when I realized they'd already won the first engagement without throwing a single punch. The scout's retreat wasn't tactical, it was psychological. His belief in predator superiority had just encountered something that didn't fit the model. Back at command, the other hunters watched the feed with growing confusion. They'd expected to see a quick capture, maybe some resistance that required minimal force. Instead, they saw one of their best scouts retreating from a teenager and her dog because they told him to leave. The comm channel stayed silent for a full minute after he cleared the area. That first contact set the pattern for everything that followed. Mira and Luna hadn't just survived an encounter, they'd established control of the engagement space. They demonstrated that this wouldn't be about physical superiority or hunting skill, it would be about who could dominate the psychological landscape. The scout's report to his commanders was brief and shaken. He described the encounter not as a failure to capture, but as a fundamental miscalculation of what they were facing. He kept repeating that they didn't behave like prey. They behaved like they owned the territory and were tolerating his presence. That single encounter shattered predator assumptions more effectively than any weapon could have. They'd prepared for a hunt. What they got was a demonstration. The clans realized their mistake within the first hour. They weren't hunting, they were being studied. Mira and Luna had turned the whole operation into a field observation exercise, except they were observing the observers. I watched thermal feeds show them moving through predator search patterns like they'd written the manuals themselves. They used the Serpathes heat-tracking assumptions against them in those box canyons. Mira would position herself where thermal gradients created false readings. Then Luna would create diversionary heat signatures, using friction techniques. The Serpathy teams kept reporting multiple targets, then no targets, then targets behind them. Their technology became a liability because it only showed what it was programmed to see. Then came the howl. Luna's vocalizations carried frequencies that bypassed rational thought and went straight to hindbrain survival instincts. It wasn't loud, just penetrating. Communications channels developed static at specific frequencies. Predator teams reported disorientation and coordination breakdowns whenever that sound echoed through the canyons. It wasn't a weapon, it was a psychological trigger. They created chaos from perfect order. Voran pack formations that should have been impenetrable found themselves tripping over suddenly apparent tripwires. Mandracy scent trackers lost the trail where Mira had used mineral deposits to mask their passage. The hunters' certainty became their weakness because Mira and Luna operated outside their prediction models. Alexis monitored from orbit, noting how every predator strength became exploitable. Their reliance on coordinated movements meant breaking coordination broke their effectiveness. Their advanced sensory equipment had blind spots that could be manipulated. Their communication systems had vulnerabilities that could be triggered. She observed that against truly adaptable opponents, specialized advantages become specialized weaknesses. The Predator's own strategies turned into traps. A Serpathy precision strike team moved into what they thought was an ideal ambush position. High ground, clear sightlines, controlled approach vectors. They didn't realize Mira had been herding them there for 20 minutes. When they settled into position, Luna's howl triggered a rock slide that blocked their retreat while Mira disappeared into terrain they'd considered secure. I watched the Predator's expressions change as Alexis laid out the details. The Voran representative stopped looking amused and started looking curious. The Serpathy commander's mandibles went still. They were beginning to understand this wasn't about physical capability, it was about cognitive synchronization. Mira could signal Luna with shifts in posture too subtle for most species to detect. Luna could read environmental threats and communicate them through body language that Mira interpreted instantly. They'd developed what humans call muscle memory together, a shared library of responses to potential threats. The Krill representative finally broke the silence with that clicking speech pattern of theirs. They asked the obvious question, how is this different from military working teams? Every species uses animals for combat and security purposes. We've all seen attack animals trained to follow commands. Alexis gave them that thin human smile again. She explained that military animals follow orders. Luna made decisions. Mira didn't command, she collaborated. Their bond allowed for adaptive problem-solving rather than conditioned responses. Where a military dog would wait for instructions, Luna would act based on shared strategic understanding. She described training scenarios where Mira would intentionally create problems without obvious solutions, forcing them to develop novel approaches together, how they'd learned to use environmental factors as weapons, how they'd practiced evasion techniques that relied on misdirection rather than speed. The Predators were listening differently now. They'd stopped seeing a child and a pet and started seeing a coordinated tactical unit. The Mandracy commander asked about their failure rate. Surely this system had weaknesses. Alexis admitted they'd failed often in training. Then she pointed out that every failure became a learning opportunity that made them more adaptable. That's when I saw the first real concern on the Voran's face. Predators understand instinct and training, but this was something else. This was two minds operating as a single decision-making entity, capable of learning and adapting in real time. They weren't just a hunt target, they were a thinking obstacle course. The chamber had gone completely silent except for the hum of life support systems. I could see the clan leaders recalculating their odds. 200 hunters against one adaptive intelligence that happened to occupy two bodies. The math started looking different when you framed it that way. Alexis let the silence stretch just long enough to become uncomfortable. Then she gave them one final detail. Mira and Luna had never been separated for more than a few hours since the girl was 12 years old. Their neural patterns had literally shaped each other's development. They didn't just work together, they'd grown together. The clans made their first critical error before the hunt even began, and it wasn't tactical, it was psychological. They assessed the situation through their own evolutionary framework, where predation meant size, speed, and killing efficiency. Every calculation they ran assumed this would be a contest of physical dominance. Their hunters were bigger, faster, and deadlier than any human or earth animal. The math looked perfect if you only counted teeth and muscle. But humans don't operate on that predator logic. Alexis explained it during the final briefing session, her voice cutting through the predator's confident posturing. She said humanity's advantage wasn't about momentary superiority, but relentless persistence. Your apex predators hunt to kill quickly, to end confrontations with maximum efficiency. Humans evolved to persist until they outlast everything, weather, terrain, even time itself. That fundamental difference in predatory psychology became the clan's fatal blind spot. I watched them prepare for the hunt like they were going to war. They brought tracking systems designed to detect heartbeats at 3 kilometers. They had thermal scopes that could spot a mouse in a blizzard. Their communication gear could coordinate 200 hunters across an entire continent. Everything was optimized for overwhelming force and quick resolution. What they didn't understand was that humans don't fight force with force. They fight momentum with adaptability. Where predators see a contest of strength, humans see a puzzle of pressure points. The clans expected tooth against tooth, claw against claw. Instead, they'd face environmental mastery and psychological warfare tactics they hadn't even conceived as weapons. The Serpathy commander was the first to catch on. I saw his posture shift during the final equipment check. Where the others were boasting about their hunters' kill counts and reaction times, he grew quiet. Started asking different questions, not about the target's physical capabilities, but about their behavioral patterns, how they reacted to stress, what their decision-making looked like under pressure. He recognized that this hunt wouldn't test hunting skill. It would test cunning. The ability to adapt to an opponent who doesn't follow predator logic, who doesn't fight or flee in predictable patterns, who might choose to stand their ground not because they're confident in winning, but because they're confident in outlasting. The other clans missed it completely. The Voran kept talking about pack tactics as if they were hunting herd animals. The Krill discussed ambush strategies designed for prey that panics and runs. They all prepared for a conventional hunt against unconventional opponents. Alexis let them have their confidence. She didn't correct their assumptions or warn them about what they were facing. Just watched with that detached human, calm that means they know something you don't. I'd seen that look before on human faces, usually right before. They do something that breaks all the rules you thought you understood. The predators were loading up with capture gear designed to restrain struggling creatures when what they needed were systems to outthink adaptive opponents. They were bringing nets and stun weapons when they should have been bringing psychological profiling tools and pattern analysis software. They were preparing for a physical contest when the real battle would be fought in the space between expectation and reality. That disconnect became their greatest vulnerability. They saw a teenage girl and her dog. They should have seen a thinking system designed to exploit every assumption predators make about how prey behaves. The hunt wasn't going to be about capture, it was going to be about demonstrating that their entire understanding of predation was incomplete. The predators made their fundamental error long before the hunt began. They analyzed the situation through their own evolutionary lens: bigger claws, faster reflexes, deadlier instincts. They saw dominance as a simple equation of physical superiority. Humans operate on a different predatory timeline entirely. Your average apex predator hunts to achieve a quick, efficient kill. Humans hunt to outlast everything around them. I watched the clan leaders assess the terms. They were calculating bite force against unarmed flesh, sprint speed against human legs, night vision against diurnal limitations. They never considered that the fight wouldn't be about any of those things. Alexis explained it with that flat human honesty that somehow sounds more threatening than any growl. She said humanity's advantage wasn't in winning fights, it was in refusing to lose them. They'd adapt, improvise, and persist long after other species would accept defeat. The Voran thought in terms of pack coordination. The Serpathy valued surgical precision. The Mandracy relied on environmental mastery. None of them understood that humans combine all three approaches into something else entirely. They don't specialize, they assimilate strategies. The clans expected a contest of hunting techniques. What they got was a demonstration of predatory evolution. When the insertion happened on Talvor 7, the disconnection between expectation and reality became immediately apparent. 200 hunters from 7 clans dispersed across the designated wilderness zone. Voran teams moved in coordinated sweeping patterns. Serpathy units set up observation perches in high terrain. Mandracy scouts began mapping scent trails and thermal signatures. They'd prepared for every conventional hunting scenario. I watched 7 predator clans declare war on humanity over a nebula worth more than entire star systems. Then Alexis Morgan stood up and offered the most insane counterproposal I've ever witnessed. 1 hunt, 1 target. A teenage girl and her dog against 200 of the galaxy's deadliest hunters. The council laughed until they saw her face. That's when I knew this wasn't a surrender. It was a trap. The council chamber hummed with that particular frequency only predator species produce when gathered in one place. 7 clan leaders sat beneath a projection of dying stars, their collective tension thicker than the reinforced glass separating us from vacuum. I watched from the observation deck, recording every shift of claw and twitch of mandible. They'd convened to settle the Cathra Expanse dispute through what they understood best: territorial dominance. That nebula wasn't just cosmic dust. It contained rare isotopes that could power fleets for centuries. Every clan wanted it, and nobody was walking away without bloodshed. War felt inevitable. I'd seen this dance before on 3 different worlds. Predators don't negotiate. They posture, they threaten, and eventually they tear each other apart. The Varan representative kept sniffing the air like he could already smell carnage. The Serpathy commander methodically sharpened his foreclaws against the conference table, leaving fine scratches in the polished surface. Then humanity's diplomat stood. Alexis Morgan moved with a calm that seemed out of place in that room. She didn't have armored plating or natural weapons, just that unsettling human confidence. The predators watched her like they'd watch a potential meal sizing them up. She spoke about resource management and sustainable governance, used phrases like conflict minimization and mutually beneficial oversight. The Voran actually snorted, a wet, dismissive sound that echoed through the chamber. They all saw it as weakness. Typical human pleading wrapped in pretty words. But then her tone shifted. She stopped talking about avoiding war and started talking about proving superiority, said something about how true strength isn't measured in how much you can destroy, but in how precisely you can control destruction. That got their attention. Predators understand contests. They understand challenges. When she proposed the wager, you could feel the atmosphere change. 1 hunt, 1 target, settled within a single planetary rotation. The details were insane. If humanity failed, they'd surrender all claims to the expanse and accept neutral administration. If they succeeded, the clans would yield the territory to ongoing competitive management. No outright winners, no total losers, just a demonstration of capability. The predators leaned forward in unison. I saw calculation in their eyes, the kind that happens when hunters spot unexpected movement in the brush. They were trying to figure out the angle. What trick was this soft-skinned species playing? Alexis didn't give them time to overthink it. She laid out the basic parameters with clinical precision. No weapons beyond what the target naturally possessed. No external support. Just a straight hunt on neutral territory. The Serpathy commander was the first to speak after her proposal. His voice had that clicking quality their species gets when intrigued. "What is the prey?" he asked. That's when she gave them that smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes. "A test subject," she said, "to see if your hunters are as good as you believe." They took the bait. Of course they did. Predators can't resist a challenge to their hunting prowess. I watched them signal agreement one by one, each thinking they'd just won the easiest victory of their careers. None of them noticed how Alexis's hands stayed perfectly still while theirs twitched with anticipation. Alexis laid out the terms with that unsettling calm humans get when they know they're about to break your reality. Her voice didn't rise or fall, just steady, precise statements that carved the agreement into the air between them. If humanity's target was captured within 1 planetary rotation, the clans would surrender all exclusive claims to the Cathra Expanse. The territory would shift to a competitive management structure where all species could operate under regulated conditions. But if the hunters succeeded, humanity would accept neutral administration of the nebula with their own personnel embedded as observers. Not complete surrender, but close enough. The predators did their calculations. 200 of their best hunters against whatever specialized human operatives they'd send. They were thinking combat cyborgs, stealth specialists, maybe even psych-conditioned soldiers with enhanced reflexes. The math looked good from their perspective. Overwhelming numbers, superior physical capabilities, centuries of hunting evolution. The Varan representative actually licked his teeth, a gesture of anticipation in their culture. Then Alexis dropped the details. The target wasn't some hardened Special Forces unit. It was a 17-year-old human female named Mira Castellanos, and her partner, a Caucasian shepherd dog named Luna, 150 pounds of fur and teeth, a child and her pet. The laughter started with the krill delegate, a series of sharp clicks that spread through the chamber. The Serpathy commander's mandibles twitched in what passes for amusement among his species. Even the usually stoic Mandracy let out a low rumble. They'd been preparing for a military engagement, and humanity sent them a teenager walking her dog. I watched them exchange looks that said the same thing. Humans had finally lost whatever collective sanity they once possessed. Alexis let the laughter die down on its own. She didn't try to shout over it or defend the choice, just waited until the chamber grew quiet again, predators leaning forward to hear what possible explanation could justify this insanity. That's when she clarified the operational parameters. They wouldn't be hunting two separate entities. Mira and Luna would operate as a single tactical unit, a combined cognitive system that shared decision-making and response patterns. The rules considered them one entity for capture purposes. Disabling or separating them would constitute successful capture, but hunting them as individual targets violated the terms. The Mandracy commander was the first to stop smiling. His species understands pack dynamics better than most. Where the others saw a weak human child and a simple animal, he started seeing something else. The way Alexis described their coordination, not as handler and tool, but as partners with integrated response patterns. His crest feathers flattened slightly against his skull, a sign of reassessment. I could see him running the numbers again. Not 200 against 2, but 200 against one complex adaptive system. The laughter had died completely now, replaced by that particular silence that falls when predators realize the prey might not be what they assumed. The other clan leaders were still caught up in their superiority. But the Mandracy had that look, the one hunters get when they've just caught a scent that doesn't match the trail. He kept studying Alexis's face, looking for the trick, the trap, the thing that would make this make sense. Because nobody stakes interstellar territory on a child and a dog unless there's something you're not seeing. Alexis didn't defend her choice. She just started explaining what they'd be facing, and that's when the mood shifted from amusement to calculation. She described their training regimen, not as handler and animal, but as two beings who'd learned to think as one system. Mira hadn't just taught Luna commands. They'd developed shared response patterns that bypassed verbal communication entirely. The girl had trained since childhood in protection sports, racking up competition wins against adult professionals. The dog came from working stockbred for independent decision-making against predators much larger than herself. They weren't master and servant. They were partners who anticipated each other's movements the way twin stars orbit a common center of gravity.